Tēnā koutou katoa. Hi, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Donna Coventry, and I am the Scholarly Communications Lead with the library at Auckland University of Technology, or AUT. And I'm on the 2026 Research Support Organising Committee, and I'll be starting and closing each day with a karakia in order to bring us together. Please feel free to read along with me, and the English translation is provided. Pohihiri, Porarama, tēnā te pau o te whakaro nui, o te nākau iti o te aroha, te pau e here nei i a tātou, Māori ora ki a tātou, haumie huie, tai ki e. And over to Jay Shree.
Good afternoon and welcome to Research Support Community Day 2026, Wadamoli as we say. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land where I'm speaking from in Townsville, Queensland, the Bindal people of the Biriguba Nation and the Wulgurukaba people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to First Nations peoples from Australia and Aotearoa who are present here today. I'm Jayshree Mamtora from James Cook University and founding member of Research Support Community Day. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this, our 14th RSC Day, and the very first one was held in 2013, filling at the time a much-needed gap in professional development in what was then a new focus on libraries and research support services. I'm pleased to say that this event remains free and is still as relevant today, with 500 participants registered for each of the 3 days. Yes, we are fully subscribed. Over the next few days, we'll hear from a diverse range of speakers addressing a number of emerging topics. Today, we'll hear about all things open with our keynote speakers this morning, Kim Tairi and Hāwea, Apiata, taking us through the lead New Zealand has taken in this area. On day 2, we'll hear from Professor Adrian Barnett on AI and research integrity, along with several other perspectives on research in the age of AI. And on day 3, Professor Sandy O'Sullivan will highlight the work that they are doing on Indigenous data sovereignty and citational justice. Other themes will include research metrics and support provided to HDR researchers. The program for each day will run over 3-hour blocks of time to allow as many of you as possible to attend at a decent hour, whether you're in Western Australia, New Zealand, or further afield. The RSC Day website provides details of all our previous events, and you can access recordings of the presentations from our YouTube channel. The organising committee is made up of librarians and information professionals from a number of institutions who volunteer their time to organise this event. This year, the other committee members are Gabby Lamb from Monash University, our host this year, and she is ably supported by colleagues Anna Stokes and Emily Hammett, Samantha Hutchinson from Wollongong University, Ria Hamblett from University of Technology, Sydney, Fiona Russell from Deakin University, and Donna Coventry from Auckland University of Technology. I would now like to hand over to my colleague, Gabby Lamb. Thank you.
Thanks, Jayshree. Hi, everyone. I'm Gabby Lamb, Academic Services Librarian at Monash. We're excited to be hosting this year at Monash. We're at capacity, which is exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get underway. So the program times are all in Australian Eastern Standard Times. All the sessions are being recorded and will be available later on our website via the YouTube channel. Any questions that you have today for any of our presenters can be added to the Q&A function. The chat is open in Zoom, but please put your questions in the Q&A so we can manage them effectively. Presenters, could you just please be ready to be promoted to panelist status in your time slot? You'll get a message via chat that it's about to happen. And all attendees are automatically muted. This year, we've also provided a feedback form on our website that you can access. And most of all, please enjoy the event. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Mr. Ashley Keleher, who is the Executive Director of Research Services at Monash University, where he oversees global research operations for Monash's faculties and international campuses. His extensive professional background spans multiple sectors, including fashion, logistics, and significant volunteer work. Since joining Monash in 2010, he has successfully directed several strategic initiatives and held senior leadership positions across multiple portfolios. So we welcome Ashley, who is standing in place of the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Enterprise, and the Senior Vice President, Robin Ward. But Ashley is going to present the opening address for us this year. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks so much, Gabby. What an impressive endeavour this is. So amazing to hear that it's essentially sold out across the patch. So are you seeing my slides on screen? That's on slide mode?
They were in presentation view initially, but they've gone back to the other.
Okay, got you. All right, just bear with me a second, sorry. So really pleased to be here. Is that showing on slide mode now?
It is.
All right, terrific. Thank you. Yeah, terrific to be here. And thank you for the warm introduction. So I'm Ashley, as Gabby said, more fondly known as Ash from Monash. You can call me. Really an amazing agenda that you've got on ahead of you for the next couple of days. I hope you have a wonderful time. I would like to start also by acknowledging the people of the Kulin Nations on whose lands Monash Australia operates on. I pay my respects to elders past and present and any Indigenous folk on the call today and Indigenous folk from wherever you are zooming in from around the world. There's a beautiful, I live near a creek and they've just opened up a beautiful Indigenous trail near me. Learning as I go through, they've got different artifacts and commentary, but I can tell you that the season is currently called Wairung in Wurundjeri, and that's representative of the colder months. So really pleased to be here and acknowledge that. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to Research Support Community Day 2026. And Monash is really proud to be hosting this event and welcoming all of you as research professionals across Australia and overseas. Certainly, development for professional staff is really close to my heart and something that I'm passionately involved in and have been throughout my career. This is such a valuable opportunity to share ideas, learn from one another, and strengthen the professional communities that support research excellence. And given the pace of change occurring across the research landscape, particularly in areas such as artificial intelligence, and I know you've got a session on that, many sessions on that coming up, open research, research integrity, there are a few more important conversations in the sector right now. This is super critical for us as a collective to navigate our way through this. So today I'd like to briefly share some of Monash's research priorities, our direction of travel, recognise the important role that research professionals play in enabling research success and the many research developments that are occurring around not only Australia but the world. Certainly research is central to who we are at Monash. Our research spans discovery, translational and interdisciplinary mission-oriented research in 201 fields of research. We're ranked 42 in QS World Rankings and we're Australia's largest university. Importantly, more than half of our publications involve collaboration with global top 100 universities. The strength of our international partnerships and our research networks are certainly evident, and we're living it every day. Approximately 25% of Australia's clinical trials involve Monash research and partners. It's a really extensive network, and it's emblematic of the scale and the ambition of research at Monash, but it also reflects the strength of professional communities that support researchers every day. Research excellence is always a team effort, and I know all of you are playing different parts in enabling the excellence that occurs. Earlier this year, Monash launched its Research and Enterprise Plan, and we've called out three main goals as part of this: how we deliver research excellence and enterprise excellence, how we accelerate the impact, and that adaptive operations. How do we really improve the systems and the services that underpin our work? We know that our researchers don't come to do administration at the university, but we've got lots of it, and we're certainly working hard to make sure that disappears, but also is super enabling with all of the platforms and the library systems that we've got, etc. So really, how do we turn those kind of practical priorities, the initiatives, and that real investment decision into real world outcomes? AI at Monash. Certainly one of the most significant developments is AI. We've recently launched Maverick. It's Australia's fastest AI supercomputer and one of the country's largest concentrations of AI expertise. We've got more than 60 AI academics and 200 AI PhD students, and spending a lot of time and effort on trying to work out how we navigate and leverage that capability to full effect. It is certainly multi-layered and complex, and it's changing our research in a really rapid pace. Looking at the literature discovery, the modelling and the simulation, the large-scale data analysis, it's already transforming so much of what we do, and we see enormous potential into the way forward. But certainly at the same time, it raises important questions around reproducibility, transparency, governance and ethics, questions of who owns the IP if it's using AI to help generate it. So not purely technical questions, and these are the questions that involve researchers, librarians, research managers, grad research specialists and professional staff across our institutions and all the staff that enable our research platforms. We'll always play, as professionals, we'll always play a critical role in helping researchers navigate these opportunities and challenges. And that opportunity is ever present today. Research and enterprise services at Monash is delivered through a connected ecosystem. We always strive to make it even more connected, a challenge of being such a large institution, but we are here to support researchers through the life cycle. That includes funding support, looking at graduate research services, research infrastructure, partnerships, innovation, commercialisation, with all the myriad of ways that we can support our staff. So the services don't operate in isolation, and one of Monash's strengths is the close collaboration between the library, research division and our graduate research office. The library plays a critical and important role in the ecosystem through open access, publishing advice, repository management, researcher training and workshops, and helping researchers maximise the visibility and reach of their work. And together, these services help our researchers navigate that complex research environment and strengthen the impact of their research. This collaborative approach allows us to provide that more connective and responsive experience for our research community. Graduate research, and I've just stepped into this space in my role recently. It is massive. There's so many good things happening in this space. And for Monash, we've got more than 5,600 graduate researchers across 96 countries. We're ranked #1 in Australia for HDR completions. And we support our researchers and our grad researchers in a shared effort across the university. So supervisors, faculties, grad research officers, library teams, professional staff all contribute to that environment that helps our graduate researchers succeed. And I know many of the work that you do directly shapes that experience and the success of the future researchers and our research leaders in the sector. I touched briefly on clinical trials at Monash. It's a really good example of just the sheer impact and the complexity that running such a big research endeavour involves. We've got clinical trials platform that is extensive. It services 4.5 million people in the catchments where we conduct those clinical trials. And again, that infrastructure, the professional expertise is absolutely critical to making sure that we can get that translation from discovery through to patient outcomes. Partnering for excellence. I know we all strive to do this. We invest about $1.3 billion in doing research each year. We've got Australia, in terms of Australian universities, we have extensive international and industry connections. And those partnerships allow us to undertake research at scale, address complex challenges, and create meaningful impact. And it involves such an extensive network, the multi-institutional agreements that we all have in place to be able to collaborate and work across and dissolve the borders that operate across our institutions is absolutely phenomenal. And being 500 strong each day of this conference is testament to that and the sheer commitment that we have across the sector to work together to get good outcomes for society. So I'll draw it to a close there. I'm happy to take any questions, Gabby and team, if there's some that have come up. But certainly from my perspective, well done to the Monash and the library team and everyone that's been involved in bringing this event together. It is certainly impressive of its scale and its breadth, and that the agenda that you've got for the next few days is super impressive.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'd like to say thanks again to the Monash Library team for setting this up, the technical side. There's a lot of work in it. So like I said before, my name's Donna Coventry. I'm the Scholarly Communications Lead at AUT, and I have got the privilege of introducing our keynote speakers today. Kim Tairi from Waikato, Tainui, is the University Librarian and Kaihotu Tiriti, or Treaty Strategist at AUT, Auckland University of Technology, my boss. A career librarian with a rich and varied working life in academic libraries and leadership. She holds key governance roles on both sides of the Tasman, including as Chair of CONSUL, which is the Council of New Zealand University Libraries. A staunch wahine Māori, queer and artist, Kim is known for her warmth, bold style and unapologetic joy, and she loves to dance and hardly ever misses a fit check selfie. Hāwea Apiata from Ngāti Kura, Ngāpui and Ngāti Tōrangitira is Pau Kōkiri Mātauranga Toi, or Indigenous Arts and Research Specialist at Te Iho o Te Manawataki, the University of Waikato Library. He works across the open research and arts collection spaces. His wider research interests include Māori and Indigenous literature with a focus on Māori language writing, archival objects and spaces, and Indigenous curatorial practice. This research is coupled with an established creative writing practice, with Hāwea recently completing his term as the Samoa House Library Writer in Residence. So, tēnā korua, welcome both.
Kia ora. Karanga te papa I te kato nei. Karanga te rangi I tū nei. Raranga hia mai te ira atua. Mauri ora. Ina mana, ina reo, ina karangaranga tanga maha. Tina koutou katoa. Ko te mihi ki te tini mā te kua hoki atu ki a pahutakawa i te rangi e kore rawa koutou e wariwari tia. Te honga mate ki te honga mate, te honga ora ki te honga ora. Ko te mihi ki te ahi kā o tēnei rohi, ko Ngāti Whātua o Rāke, tīnā koutou katoa. Ko te mihi ki ngā tupuna me ngā kaumātua o Kulin Nations, always was, always will be. Tūana ki te tihi tapu o Maunga Tautari, ka te tiro whakararo ki taku waitapu Waikato, Waikato tani whārau, he piko he tani whā, he piko he tani whā. E tika ana tēnei whakatauki ko au te awa, ko te awa ka au. I am the river and the river is me. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora and greetings, hello friends. The mihi that I just shared, or welcome, acknowledges our ancestors, those who have passed, and the traditional custodians of the land. And I also want to pay my respects to all the Indigenous peoples from around the world who are joining us today. I'm Kim Tairi. My ancestors are from the mighty Waikato. I'm, as Donna said, the University Librarian at AUT. I have the good fortune to work with Donna. I just want to say ngā mihi nui, thanks for inviting us here today to share our story. Kia ora.
Kia ora mai tātou. E riri ana ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. E tautoko ana i ngā mihi kua mihia, e taku hoa, e Kim. Ai, noku te waimari, e noku te whewhi, te whaiwahi mai ki tēnei kaupapa, tēnā no tātou. Hello everyone, my name's Hāwea Apiata. And just, yeah, I just sort of second Kim's mihi and acknowledgement to everyone, and it's a privilege to be able to be here to share this keynote with her today. So kia ora. I am Hāwea Apiata, like Donna mentioned. I come from Ngā Tikura e Ngā Puhi, which is in the north part of the North Island of New Zealand, and Ngāti Tōrangatira, which is down the bottom of the North Island. And I'm the Pōkokiri mātauranga toi at University of Waikato Library. So kia ora. We can jump into the first slide. Just so in 2023, my colleague Jess Hāwea and I, who I know many of you will know, I had the opportunity to write the official open research position statement for the University of Waikato. Our position statement served as one of the many starting points for the National Universities New Zealand document, and Jess and I were invited to contribute to the early draft. And so in conversation with Kim, we decided to preface this wider conversation about the UNZ statement with just briefly recounting our approach in developing the Waikato statement as a sort of case study, and then with it now being 3 years on, just sharing some reflections and discussing the impact of having a position statement and some of the things we've been able to achieve. After that, I'll hand the time over to Kim to effectively zoom out and talk about how things have been approached and applied at a national level with the UNZ statement. So just jumping straight in, to give a brief overview of what we did from the outset of the kaupapa, the project, we knew we had to make it really clear that this was not simply a library initiative for which we were seeking endorsement, but a university initiative being spearheaded by the library. And so we intentionally worked with select people around the university who had influence and expertise and even seniority in certain spaces that we could gain feedback from and use as soundboards where necessary. So naturally, relationships really were key. And I should point out here too that our university librarian, Michelle Blake, was very involved in all of this. And in fact, that leader-to-leader engagement was really essential. Another purpose for these strategic relationships was that we knew the draft document ultimately needed to be approved and endorsed at the highest level, committee level, for it to be implemented institution-wide. And so many of these people we involved sat on these committees. And so by the time we took the position statement to those meetings, we knew we had people in the room who would not only support us, but almost champion the kaupapa or the cause alongside us. Just a note on the broad scoping, Jess and I scoped out docs and position statements from universities all around the world, to the point of losing count. And while it was really useful, ultimately we just really wanted to create something that was specific to not only our New Zealand context, but our context in Waikato. The university in Waikato is the only one in New Zealand that's based on tribally owned land. And so taking all of those kinds of things into account informed our process. Being deliberate with our language. Sorry. I'll speak to this a bit more in a moment, but awareness about open research as a kaupapa, as an initiative, as a movement, as a thing, was generally quite low at the beginning. So even now there's still work to be done. So we needed to be really clear about what we mean when we say open research, and provide definitions where necessary. On the building credibility, if I can just be frank for a moment, I'm sure I'm not alone when I say this. I've encountered plenty of people who have worked in universities for 10, 20, 30 years, who have little to no idea about what libraries or librarians do, or about the spaces we work across. And so to sort of mitigate those comments of like, why is the library doing this? Why is the library leading this? Why are they involved in research, dissemination, and publication? We had to really show that this is something that sits firmly in our wheelhouse. And those strategic relationships I mentioned earlier were important in this too. Where we had the right people in our corner who understood what we were doing. We were very aware that our true starting point for an open research position statement needed to be Indigenous data sovereignty. And so the opportunity presented itself to embed an institutional commitment to Māori data sovereignty within the position statement. We were able to do this by leveraging the university's existing public commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So just very quickly for guests overseas or anyone unfamiliar with our context here in Aotearoa, we have a treaty signed in 1840 between Māori leaders and the British Crown. One aspect of our treaty is that it affirms our pre-existing rights and sovereignty over our lands and over what we call our taonga, or our treasures, or anything that is of value or significance to us. And so in the New Zealand context, the concept of Māori sovereignty over knowledge, information, data is predicated on the idea that data is or are a taonga of value to us, and so data should be subject to Māori governance and control. And so while the concept of Indigenous data sovereignty is and should be valid for all Indigenous communities around the world, in our local context, it's something that's reinforced by and grounded in our treaty. And so keeping our data onshore makes it not only subject to New Zealand law, but also to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So it was also our aim to show that the movement and vision of open research or open scholarship can absolutely coexist with the movement and vision of Indigenous data sovereignty. I won't go too much into this, but obviously amongst Indigenous communities, there's a long history of mistrust and cynicism towards research institutions. And so historically, benefits derived from research conducted using information from, by, or about Indigenous peoples have rarely flowed back into the communities from which that knowledge originated. So understandably, pushing for or advocating for openness around knowledge can set off some alarm bells. And so just to gesture to my earlier comments, it became all the more important for us to be clear and concise about what exactly we mean when we say open. And how ultimately it will always come back to the open as possible and closed as necessary. If we could just move to the next slide. Thank you. I'm not going to spend too long here for time's sake, but the position statement itself was sort of like the high level what, making our stance and intentions clear. And then we followed this up with guiding principles that gave more of the practical how and why. So trying to make it easy for people to put into practice and give them confidence and incentive. So as you can see from the visualization, these principles were partnership, responsibility, reach, bibliodiversity, rigor, and inclusive. And these were coupled with other resources on our website with practical tips. So for example, the partnership principle is where you'd find guidance in relation to Māori data sovereignty. And so we decided to go with partnership to encourage researchers to think about where the power sits in their relationships, especially if they're working with community, and consider decision-making in relation to data management and establishing with the community from the outset what that looks like. So some of the practical guidance might be giving scenarios like it's time to publish, your chosen journal has asked for your research data to be published as well. Here are the things to consider and some possible pathways you can take where you can still account for Indigenous data sovereignty standards. The last thing I'll mention about this in regard to socializing the kaupapa around the university, we made a concerted effort to target ECRs and postgraduate students, PhD candidates. So really trying to get in on the ground floor and establish good publishing practices early on, because we find that generally the research dissemination publication component is not really embedded in their postgraduate training in any sort of practical way. And so people often ended up following the habits of their supervisors, just because that's the only model they had for publishing, or people just didn't know it all. And so we found we had quite a few ECRs and PhD students reaching out. And so on a practical level, I was able to plug into certain networks for Māori and Pacific postgrads and ECRs to deliver info sessions, workshops, consults, and embed the idea that the library was the support, was there to support dissemination and publication. We can move to the next slide. So lastly, just giving this kōrero 3 years down the track provides a nice opportunity to reflect on the impact and the things we've been able to achieve. I will point out that some of the kaupapa were developed in tandem with or alongside the position statement, so not necessarily as a result of, but they've also been instrumental in giving effect to the statement, so I've included them here too. Having an institution-wide document is really useful, being able to give weight to the initiative or the cause. So just starting off on a real practical level, as I mentioned earlier, awareness around open research and Indigenous data sovereignty was quite low. So in a world where, you know, at least at our institution, where there's a massive push to put everything on the cloud, where there are active projects happening to migrate things off local servers, we found we hit immediate walls or roadblocks when requesting on-site storage space from our ITS department. And so having the position statement allowed us to not only to get what we needed and secure local data storage for researchers, but to educate through those conversations as well. The Open Access Equity and Bibliodiversity Fund. So this is something sort of established alongside the position statement, but the statement obviously justifies it. And in turn, the fund is one of the ways the statement is enacted on our end. And it probably comes as no surprise that it has been one of the most effective tools for us in influencing research culture and spreading awareness of open research. It's us effectively putting our money where our mouth is. And the commitment to financial support for open access publishing by the library, funding or co-funding APCs, BPCs, and CPCs. So as I said, this has been an amazing conversation starter, an easy foot in the door for getting people to consider how their research exists in the world and thinking about how accessible their work is. Next is another initiative that I think has been justified by the position statement, which was the creation of a new specialist role, the Kai Hapai Mātauranga, Māori data steward, who has in their remit all things data sovereignty and data management, and supporting researchers in that space. And we're very fortunate to have an incredible person in that role currently, my colleague Lee Timutimu, who even outside of the university and their work is a leader in this space. So being able to offer a targeted service for this allows us to again give effect to the statement. And then lastly, the commitment to material investment. So I assume many of your universities have strategic plans devised by like the senior leadership that set objectives and guides initiatives for the institution over the set period of time. Excuse me. So in our most recent 5-yearly strategic plan, which is visible on the slide there, this point related to infrastructure and Indigenous data sovereignty, this was not in the original draft that was sent out for consultation amongst university staff, but they invited feedback, both in person and written. And so naturally I did both and went along to the in-person meetings armed with the position statement and having thought about where we want to go next and where do we need to develop further. And for us, it was investment in digital and physical infrastructure, specifically to support Indigenous data sovereignty. So ideally expanding options for local data storage. We are a smaller institution at Waikato. We don't yet have a data repository, but by hook or by crook, and with this embedded in the strategic plan, we will get one. So these are just some of the examples of having an institution, of the benefits of having an institution-wide document. And so just before I hit pause and hand it over to Kim, I just wanted to say, like, in all of this, I'm realistic. Like, you know, institutions' priorities change, leadership's interests change, and different people come and go in those leadership roles who have different focus. And so, you know, and on top of that, we've seen in real time over the past couple of years, the ways in which the governments of the day, and unfortunately in our case in New Zealand, shape and influence the scholarly landscape. But this is just a story of how we have persisted in our circumstances and how this tool of the position statement has enabled us to carry the kaupapa forward. So kia ora. On that note, I'll just pass it over to Kim.
Ngā mihi, Hāwea, thank you very much for that. And it's a powerful story and very much part of the journey to the open research statement. 2022, 2023 was quite a heady time in open scholarship in Aotearoa. I liken it to a syzygy or a convergence. There are lots of things happening in and around Aotearoa that created the right conditions for a pan-university statement. And I just want to acknowledge some of those things that were happening, as well as the incredible kaupapa led by Jess and Hāwea at Waikato. I'd have to say that the Aotearoa scholarly communications community is incredibly strong. And this community of practitioners and researchers did amazing work and continue to do amazing work. And one of the great things that happened was a longitudinal study, again, led by Jess Howie from Waikato and Richard White from Otago Whakaihu Waka, Otago University, who essentially looked at the open access rates in Aotearoa across a 5-year period with an amazing project team of scholarly comms people across New Zealand. And that painted a picture for us. So what we learnt is that we grew open research as a community to about 58%. But there was still a lot of research hidden behind paywalls, and we wanted to make that open to the rest of the world. Then around the same time, Dr. Tom Saunders was interning for Professor Dame Juliet Gerard in the Chief Scientist Advisor to the Prime Minister at the time, and produced the Future is Open Access report, talking about the opportunity in Aotearoa for collective and national work and action to make research more open. And then also around the same time, John Gretsch, who is from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, based off the work that Jess and Richard and the project team did, and Tom's kaupapa and work happening around Aotearoa. They were the first funder to release an open research mandate. So the kaupapa here rangahau tūwhera was released in 2023, which essentially said that anything that's publicly funded by MB money needed to be opened by default. So this syzygy, this energy, we had the evidence from the longitudinal study, the work of Tom, the funders were on board. We have the existing infrastructure in our universities with our repositories, certainly community readiness with the scholarly communications community. And it was really a case of practice leading policy, and you can see that in Waikato. The practice that was coming and led from the library led to a statement from the whole university. And so with all these different planets waiting to be aligned, including the work around Indigenous data sovereignty, we were able to shift the conversation, and the conditions were right to be able to get the Deputy Vice-Chancellors and the Vice-Chancellors to endorse an open access statement. And the conversation has shifted over the last 5 years from talking about open access to very much conversations about changing research culture. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Aotearoa New Zealand context, Universities New Zealand is equivalent of Universities Australia. Essentially, it's the peak body for vice-chancellors or universities in Aotearoa. And until recently, CONSUL, so it's the Council of Aotearoa New Zealand University Libraries, was a subcommittee of Universities New Zealand. And now we're a community of practice. So building on the syzygy that already was existing in Aotearoa, Universities New Zealand established the Open Access Steering Group under the stewardship of Professor Brian E. James, who was then at Waikato, and Dr. Bronwyn Kelly from Universities New Zealand. And we became, the steering group became one of UNZ's working groups. Membership of the steering group included a DVCR, a Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, the chair of our copyright experts group for UNZ, 2 representatives from CONSUL, the chair and another member. And that was really in recognition that academic libraries have done a lot of the heavy lifting around open scholarship and open research within our institutions. And because we were leading a lot of that work, it was really important to have multiple voices from university librarians on that steering group. One of the things we learned very quickly, if you want to get vice-chancellors on board, you need to have a tangible goal or target. And that was moving that 58% identified in the longitudinal study of open access up to 70%. It was an aspirational target, continues to be, but I'll talk about that a bit later. One of my favourite parts of the Pan University statement was the calling out of academic publishers to offer sustainable, viable, affordable, open access options. And that's something that we're still working on in the sector. And also a commitment to, at the time, fair and care. In 2025, we really wanted to shift the focus from open access to open research in its broadest sense, and to talk about culture as well as open access, to talk about the ecosystem of open research more broadly. And the reality is that, just, reiterating and building on some of the stuff that Hāwea said, that we can't really shift open access without more investment in infrastructure and national champions. We've done as much as we can, and we'll continue to do this work, but we need to think about the open research landscape a little bit differently. Also, the language has shifted in the open research statement. So as well as moving away from the target, we're talking about knowledge production. A lot of that is to do with having language that resonates with our current government and funders. So we're talking about production of knowledge in this context. Also, one of the great things about the research statement is that it's expanded on its commitment from a commitment to fair and care frameworks to explicit mention of tiriti and Māori data sovereignty and other Indigenous data sovereignty frameworks. And I think this is really important. In Aotearoa, we could never get agreement to sign or endorse a statement like that without this kind of commitment. So really, there is a reinforcing of the importance of knowledge justice. So enabling Indigenous communities to enjoy their sovereign protection of knowledges, and ensuring that we acknowledge whose knowledge systems are being used. The research statement also is shifting the conversation, because we don't actually need to convince people in our institutions anymore about the values of open access. They will choose open access given the choice, and if the models enable that to be done easily. And it's great to hear of examples like Waikato, where they're actually supporting the payment of APCs. The conversation's now much more expansive. It's what is research culture in Aotearoa, New Zealand? Who is the current system of academic publishing serving? Recognition that the current system is not sustainable and that we need to look at other models. And the open research statement really talks about, that production model, and acknowledges all the different people that are involved in producing knowledge in Aotearoa. And it is a line in the sand, I guess, in terms of ensuring that we keep doing this work together. The current chair of the Open Access Steering Group is Professor Chad Hewitt from Deakin University. And I did mention to Professor Hewitt that we were doing this keynote and asked for a pithy quote. And of course, he gave me one. I really like what he said about open research culture, and by creation of an open research culture, in doing so, New Zealand's research becomes more impactful in society and public policy, ensuring evidence-informed public debate, and enhances national, regional and global collaboration. And culture and collaboration in open research is really important. And then our colleague from CONSL, the Council of University Librarians in Aotearoa, Kat from University of Canterbury said that the statements have really raised awareness around Canterbury, around citation impact, open publishing, and the positive societal impacts. We talk a lot about impact in universities, but as my colleague Craig Murdoch said in a hui yesterday, impact is not clearly defined, or it's ill-defined. And I guess my challenge to the research community and this community is to think about, how does your institution define impact? How do you as a researcher define impact? And as you as somebody that supports the research community define impact? What does impact mean to us in Aotearoa, New Zealand? I can't speak for everyone, but I would like to see a move away from a narrow definition of impact, where the focus is on citations and commercialisation and IP, and to one that focuses on reciprocity. I mean, who can get access to the research, who contributed to it, whose knowledge systems shaped it, and who benefits. Open research in a Aotearoa New Zealand context then becomes about the impact, a real impact for the people who contributed. It's about reciprocity and balance. And in Te Ao Māori, the Māori world, we call this utu. And really, for me, open research sits in that space of acknowledging where and who produced the knowledge and giving back to those communities. Did we shift the dial with the open research statement and the open access statement? Yes, enough, probably not, but we're not finished yet. We also developed an open access toolkit, and that project was led by Berit Anderson from Waipapa Taumatarau, and Hāwea was on that project, and Donna, and that toolkit is available on the Open Access Australasia website. It's downloadable and customizable globally. Go forth and use it, share it with your researchers. But the work, the statements, as Hāwea said, have definitely paved the way for collaboration with our research community, for collective action regionally, because all this work that we do around open research is relational. The collective action between UNZ and Universities New Zealand, Universities Australia, and CAUL, the Council of Australasian University Librarians, built on to those existing relationships that are already happening in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and particularly when it comes to negotiating with our academic publishers, But we've still got challenges. I know that I'm preaching to the converted here. This community is very much on board with the kaupapa, with the purpose of this work around open research and open access. I just want to also point you to a publication by Janet Catterall, Dr. Ginny Barber, and myself called Filling Your Basket with Knowledge, and it's about the evolution of open access in Australia and Aotearoa. In the paper, we talk about how institutionally, nationally, globally, geopolitically, the dial has shifted. Yet more than a third of publicly funded research remains behind paywalls. Commercial publishing models are crowding out more equitable, community-driven alternatives. We don't yet have national strategies in Australia and New Zealand or sustainable infrastructure, despite both our countries having major reviews of our research and science systems within our countries. We all know the challenges, but as I mentioned before, the practice of our communities has shaped policy within our institutions and is leading to changes nationally. And we've got to remember that. This is people power in action. and I have a strong belief in the power of community. We often do things together in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and ask for permission later. We're small enough to do that, and we've got a couple of projects on the boil around diamond publishing, which are really exciting, and hopefully we'll be able to share news about that in the coming year. The open research statement is very much an aspiration. It's a line in the sand, and we continue to work towards it in our universities. So at the beginning, in the mihi, I shared this whakatauki, ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au. I am the river, and the river is me. As we work together in this community to remove obstructions, we're all part of that river. We're all part of that energy. I did consider putting a picture of Aotearoa on this slide because so many people have been part of the journey to develop the statements and continue to do the work. And we're part of an incredible global network and communities of practice. And anyone that knows or who works in research knows that knowledge production involves many people. So to those people who stood up in academic boards around Aotearoa and said academic publishing needs to change, to those amazing people who continue to make their research open and are making a difference, and finally to our ancestors who came before us and our descendants that will come after us. This journey is about keeping those rivers of knowledge continuing to flow. And on that note, I'd like to finish with our karakia before we open up for questions. Me karakia tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, kia tere te kaurohi I mua I tō huarahi, mauri ora.
Ngā mihi nui, Kim and Hāwea. So we've got quite a few questions actually, but probably time to ask a couple. So I get the honour of choosing the questions. I might go for what lessons from the Aotearoa experience do you think are most transferable to other national or institutional contexts?
Big pause there. Sorry, Donna, can you repeat the question? I was just taking a breath after talking for 20 minutes solid.
What lessons from the Aotearoa experience do you think are most transferable to other national or institutional contexts?
For us, it was really a case of building onto a momentum that was really already happening in Aotearoa. And we were able to leverage the relationships that we had with, I guess, senior administrators within our organisations. And that made a real difference because although the scholarly communications community are doing a lot of the work on the ground, we needed that authority, that mana, an endorsement from our senior leaders to be taken seriously by universities, New Zealand, and in fact by our research committees, by academic board. It really helps if we partner with academics to do this work, and it's very much part of our practice in the sector anyway. It's all about collaboration and partnerships. So there's making sure that you have great champions, and I think it's that thing that acknowledge the wins as you go along. It's very much a long tail, this work, and we, sometimes it can get disheartening, especially when the geopolitical climate changes and it seems a bit hostile to the work that we're doing. But I always come back to our communities. If you want to kind of be reassured that the work that we're doing is valuable, just look at, what happened during COVID when they opened up research and, we had vaccines in a very short amount of time. And, it's life-changing. Kia ora.
And one more if you can answer. It's the very first question. One of our first questions. Australia doesn't have a treaty. How do you see this affecting our Indigenous data sovereignty compared to the New Zealand experience?
A good question that I don't know I'm qualified to really answer. But as you know, as I said, like the treaty, beyond the treaty, the concept of Indigenous data sovereignty is obviously applicable and as valid for all Indigenous communities around the world. And obviously each individual context is going to look really different. I think what's most important is like centering the right voices. So just like Kim's been saying, comes back to community, and letting not only letting community lead, but like providing the support and resources needed to be able to lead effectively and in an informed way around all this. If the expertise around scholarly communications, open research, all that kind of stuff, as it lays within the institution, then it's like providing that support on whatever level the community is comfortable with. But at the end of the day, it's just centering those voices is all I can say. So, yeah.
And I guess I'd like to add is that make sure that you hire people within your organisations, and it was really good to see that Waikato have done that, and you know, we're certainly at AUT building our capacity in that space, but it is a specialist expertise. You can't just go up and ask any brown person about Indigenous data sovereignty because they might not have that knowledge. It's not an assumption that we can make or a colonial load that we should put on people. And, you know, we want this space to be Indigenous led, and that means that you need to hire and recruit and build the capacity of Indigenous people in this space.
Thank you again. Thank you both so much. And there's quite a few questions there. So we're actually going to get you to type answers, if you don't mind, to any of those questions. Thank you. Again, now I get to introduce our next speakers. We have got, scroll down. I'd like to introduce Scout Bell and Kaitlyn Houston from Murdoch University. So they're going to introduce what they're talking about. Over to you, Scout and Kaitlyn.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Kaitlyn and I would like to acknowledge that the traditional owners of the land that we are sharing on today is of the Whadjuk people of Mononga Nation. And today we're going to be talking through relationality in open scholarly publishing. And it came up, actually, it was a word that came up in the keynote. But we're going to be bridging some of my PhD research with Murdoch University Library Research Services. As you can probably tell as well from this first slide, covering a lot of ground in a very short time. So that we're all on the same page of where we're actually heading, I'll be starting us off with all things data and theory, and then I'll be handing over to Kaitlyn, who's going to talk us through relationality in practice. And relationality here refers to a focus on connectedness. So that's that no personal thing is actually going to exist in isolation. But when we're talking about it, especially in relation to knowledge, we're also talking about things like agency. So that's about power and inequities in knowledge creation and access and how we connect. So jumping right in, my doctoral research uses data from COKI, so it's Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative, to look at collaborations with Australia internationally for climate-related research. And we can see that research collaborations have increased year on year, and so has openness. However, if we go beyond these surface level stats, we can also see that golden hybrid OA has grown substantially, but also that Australia's collaborations with our closest neighbours tend to be less open than our collaborations with regions like Europe. And when they are open, they're less likely to take the repository route. we can see that there's roughly an 18% point gap between collaborations that are open with European regions and those with Asian regions. And that's in addition to those discrepancies in the type of open as well. So taking this even just a little bit further, beyond just is it open and what type of open, these statistics don't actually tell us much about the research or open access process itself. It's really just the outputs at the end. So Kaitlyn and I are looking at what might thinking about the process and participation itself actually look like. So I'd like everyone to just pause here a moment with me and just think of access in a very broad sense. So that could be access to absolutely anything. It doesn't have to be research. It could be access to a space or a room, access to receiving care, access in the workplace or to access to employment, or access to any kind of resource that we might need. And often in libraries and also in research, in leadership, we're very focused on access as being the end goal. So in leadership, we might be really decisive and make decisions that achieve access, but also forget about the process and who's participating in actually achieving that access. And in libraries or scholarly communication work, we might also think of access as the most important thing that we can actually achieve, but forget to dig a little bit deeper and understand whose work we're providing access to, whether that access is achieved equitably, and also if that access is actually meaningful to people, or perhaps even causes more labour. And that's where process and participation are really important to what we're actually looking at today. So that's how we achieve openness or access and who actually gets to participate. And one way that we can look at these conversations on process and participation in open access or open science is through relationality. So I mentioned earlier that relationality isn't just about the connection and the relationship part, but also about agency and our capacity to act. So when it comes to knowledge, that might invite questions around who controls or extracts knowledge, where power imbalances lie, and it's where we need to understand what those relational qualities and interdependencies that are inherent in our structures and processes when it comes to open scholarship actually look like. And two relational philosophies of open science that I'm drawing on in my research already do that. So we've got scaling small, which Yannicka and Samuel discuss, and that's about prioritizing intentional collaboration and sharing. So it reconsiders what governance means based on mutual reliance and interdependence rather than separation and competition. It's about small independent presses or communities building collective infrastructure. And rather than scaling up and pursuing rapid growth, they're fostering connections and collaborations to build together. And one of the great things about scaling small is that it can actually help us to preserve bibliodiversity. So it avoids monopolies and retains local contexts and situated knowledge. And that really ties in nicely with a process-oriented view of research, which instead of focusing on outputs and research objects, focuses on the processes and practices that it takes to actually get there and to build meaningful human connections and interactions along the way. So it moves from this idea, the traditional idea of openness as being focused on just the sharing, owning, or controlling of objects and outputs towards the process of knowledge production itself. It's asking questions about who gets to participate, whose ideas are valued, heard, and supported, how we understand and interpret the world around us. So really that active kind of phase of knowledge. And both of these philosophies, though, there's a concept that comes up, there's a few concepts that come up that actually overlap with disability justice and disability culture. So those are things like care ethics and interdependence rather than just independence. And they really inform what a relational and community-centered approach looks like. Which leads us to the question, what can critical disability studies actually offer open scholarship? So with critical disability studies, I am further problematizing what we actually take for granted, whether that's, for example, care ethics in open access, but even open access itself as being framed as an unquestionably good initiative. And so there's this underlying ethical imperative for things like care ethics that is part of what drives us forward. But we also see conversations in critical disability studies around the dark side of care and the risk of paternalism when power dynamics and the right governance structures aren't actually in place. So again, if we're returning to that idea of providing access and thinking about the care that we bring to our work and to communities, it does require pausing and actually asking who's involved in that process, who will be providing access for, and are there opportunities to do it with communities and with people who whose voices and perspectives need to be centred in this work. So that's again pausing and questioning whether the processes we take for granted produce equitable outcomes and not assuming that access is automatically going to be equitable. So there's 2 disability justice principles that I'm using as a framework in my research. So we've got collective access and leadership by the most impacted. And collective access asks that we move beyond a compliance and outputs approach to a more iterative, interdependent and connected form of care and access. So it means that access isn't just a checkbox approach, but rather it takes a community effort with shared responsibility and also flexibility. And leadership by the most impacted, which you would have heard me already touch on a little bit, means that we're willing to listen to the voices of those most impacted by decisions and consider who is actually centred in our decision-making processes. So the idea behind that is that those facing the greatest systemic barriers will often have their knowledge decentered or discredited, yet they're often best equipped to actually contribute to producing solutions. And Kaitlyn and I were discussing this quote by Samuel Moore, which I've added to the slide here, which we thought really captured what relationality looks like in open access and research support really perfectly. And that's process over outputs and culture over outcomes. So I want to leave us with a question as I hand over to Kaitlyn, and that's how can we ensure open knowledge and its governance is experienced as done with communities, not for, to, or about? And with that, I will hand over to you, Kaitlyn.
Thank you, Scout. In my section, I'm going to be outlining what relationality can look like in practice using our team as a case study. So some of the concepts and theory that Scout has mentioned are quite high level, so I think it helps to connect with some examples. I will point out that relationality will look different for each institution and also even different teams within an institution, which is kind of the point. So relationality is really the gear that's driving my team's development and support, which in turn is driving our services and engagement with researchers. Scout mentioned scaling small. We are quite a small team. We cover scholarly communication, systematic review support, also repository and profiles amongst a team of 4 or 5 people. So for us, it's really about building those connections where we can. It hasn't always been measurable or progressed in a linear fashion. We haven't been ticking off boxes of a relationality project. But on reflection, we can actually see progress through the process, and that aligns with the strategic priorities of our team, our library and the university as well. In terms of my team's development and support, relationality looks like leading with care, flexibility and encouragement. I really genuinely care about my team and them as people, not just workers. Flexibility in approach to task allocation, some deadlines within the framework of our library and university policies on flexible working arrangements as well. Encouragement will look different for everyone again, but it might be something like encouraging a new librarian to back themselves in their knowledge, someone else to go for a secondment opportunity or lead a project, and sometimes even to take some leave. We approach knowledge creation as a shared activity and a process. The PD activities the team has found most worthwhile have been those with lots of discussion and exploration of ideas together, and a process because especially in the research support space, things change and there's always more to learn. You might get a sense of mastery of something and then something will change. So that's to acknowledge that and also understand that that's okay. That's something that's inherent in this space. Through this knowledge creation that we've done as a shared activity, we've broadened our understanding of what a research output is, concepts of open scholarship and access and research assessment. Focused on developing individual expertise in certain areas where there might be gaps or special interest. So kind of a combination of job crafting, development, and identifying opportunities. Partnerships and collaboration. So these are on things like with library colleagues on redesigning some searching workshops, other research support colleagues at the university, like presenting at an ARC grant information session with the research and innovation folks, and with our graduate research office on a few different things. And also in how we approach consultations, because we're not discipline specialists, we're generalists. The researcher is expert in their topic and we're the expert in what they do. So really approaching that as a collaboration. And making sure that the team have input into things that affect them, that's done with rather than to. So working with my team on how I might allocate tasks for them. For some person, you can say, can you do X, Y, Z? And that's totally fine. For someone else, they need to know UVW before they can do X, Y, Z. Also input into how frequently we might do one-to-ones. I don't really have a set rule, so working with someone and reviewing that as needed as well, because that can also change. When our office space was redesigned to fit in new desks, the team voted on potential desk configurations and which desk they would prefer as well. So relationality then when it comes to our services and our researchers, touched on some of them on the previous one as well, but to go into that a bit more, with our service development, I might have initially identified things and put it on the strategy, but it's really been driven and developed by the team through collective agency and that recognition through the knowledge creation. Our pathways to open, our advice there has become much more holistic. So rather than just, we've got these read and publish agreements, we talk about open access more broadly, different pathways that you might take, open scholarship as well. So things like pre-registration of protocols, and discussion of going into the next one, non-traditional research outputs and DOIs. So both the technical capacity of that through our research portal, but then the promotion and advice given to researchers as well. Our portal and profile stakeholder group was initially brought together for input of our academics on configuring new functionalities in our Exploro platform. It's been really wonderful group to meet with regularly. We've got lots of diverse perspectives from different disciplines and career stages, and it's actually helps to grow more connections and gather evidence on how people are using the Exploro platform in their day-to-day work, but also the library connection more broadly. They're asking things that are related to other things as well. So it's really good to see the connections there. And also to encourage those repeat interactions and connections. I'm sure everyone has kind of experience where they've helped someone and then they, rather than going through the logging a ticket method, will just contact them directly. And while it's not, ideal in terms of collecting data, it's also not something we want to particularly discourage. Building those connections and having that repeat interaction to develop that relationship is important to us. So a final thought here is that relationality is an ongoing process rather than a checkbox approach. But as illustrated by these arrows kind of flying off the ongoing process there, it can still support achieving strategic goals and help progress the vision.
Thank you so much, Scout. And Kaitlyn, as someone who works on a publishing platform of community front of mind, it's really interesting to hear some theory behind that, actually. I've got one question here. It's how have you engaged researchers at Murdoch with these concepts?
Kaitlyn, do you want me to start with this one? I might hand over to you for slightly more on the ground kind of perspectives. So I think it depends on who we're actually engaging. So I know that from a leadership perspective, a lot of actually what Kim was mentioning about needing those kind of compliance measures and what's the target, that has come up a lot. And so I've stepped into spaces and taken a very relational approach and considered culture and how do we bring people along and realize that, oh, okay, actually there is this focus on compliance when we're talking about open access, and immediately I think it happens in a lot of different spaces. You mentioned open access, and there's particular connotations, particular approaches, particular perspectives associated with it. And I think it's interesting to see how relationality is actually kind of either recognized or not recognized in those spaces, because sometimes I think it's just not recognized as a perspective. And I find that in my research as well, so not just at Murdoch. But Kaitlyn, do you want to talk about more, one-to-one team-based research connections?
I would say for the most part, it is probably more reactive. So when we have queries coming in and how we're then responding with our researchers on that. For some things, there has been more of a proactive go out, but it can be a bit harder to get people engaged rather than when they're already coming to have a chat to us. And rather than kind of not over preparing, but you don't want to assume that what they're asking is the extent of it. Often through the course of that conversation, you discover that what they're asking is actually not what they're asking and not what the best outcome will be. So, I suppose just through conversations and finding things out, being willing to listen and try new things and be flexible.
So thank you. We have one more question. I might get you to answer that if you can in the Q&A. And it's about if people want to start embedding this approach, how might they begin? So now we're going to have a break for 10 minutes. So we'll be coming back at past, whatever hour you're in right now. So we'll see people back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you've managed to have a bit of a stretch and had time to make a cuppa. And now we have a series of 4 lightning presentations of 5 minutes duration each. They will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A session for all 4 presentations. So first, we have Wayne Bradshaw from James Cook University.
Thanks, Jayshree. Just let me share my screen. We share. Hopefully you can all see the slides. Let me know if you can't. Thank you for joining us for this session, of course, again. And I would quickly like to note that I live and work on the lands of the Bindal and Walkarukaba peoples. Their country was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today, I'll be discussing some insights from an open access survey conducted here at James Cook University at the end of 2025 and analysed in 2026 for implementation in the coming months here in our library. I'd like to acknowledge that this project was led by Jayshree Mamtora, who just introduced me, with support from Tove Lemberget and myself. We're all here in this session today, and I'd also like to thank the many researchers who participated in the survey and made this little bit of research possible. Okay, over the past 3 years, James Cook University Library has implemented a range of initiatives aimed at improving researchers' understanding of open access publishing. We've designed workshops and online content, promoted read and publish agreements, and run a variety of open access competitions. Any of you who've heard me speak before have probably heard me talk about our Green Open Access competition that we ran for 2 years, as well as other open access competitions that preceded my time here at the James Cook University Library. Lots of work went into advancing open access, obviously, but what we wanted was a sense of what impact we were having and where we could improve, how we could better target the researchers here at JCU. To this end, we designed a survey instrument for the university community. It was open to all JCU researchers and consisted of 14 questions. It encompassed 4 key areas we were interrogating. Researchers' understanding of pathways to open access, researchers' experience with open access publishing themselves, perceived barriers for researchers to open access publishing, and better avenues for library outreach. So we received responses from 171 researchers. I was incredibly impressed with the success we had in getting buy-in from the research community. 33% of respondents came from the College of Science and Engineering, while around 20% came from the College of Medicine and Dentistry. That makes sense. They're both areas that we focus on in this university's research profile. The proportion from other colleges and organisational units was consistently around 10%, with 1 respondent from outside the academy. You can see JCUS might be a bit of an unknown to those outside of the JCU community. That refers to our Singapore campus, which is a separate organisational unit. So that's James Cook University, Singapore. 26% of our respondents were senior researchers, and further 26 were mid-career researchers. 11% were early career researchers, and 36% were research students. I think I've doubled the mid-career researchers there. Almost half of respondents declared that they were comfortable with explaining at least one open access colour to a colleague. So for this question, we only gave them the colour and asked if they were confident explaining that. Us as librarians, as library staff, are all very confident with the colours. The majority of these respondents identified themselves as familiar with the basic principles of green and gold open access publishing. That's fair enough. What might be a bit of a shock is that 54% of researchers were not familiar enough with any open access colours to confidently explain them to a colleague. Plenty of work, it seems, to do with Diamond Open Access, you can see from the graph. But it also raises some familiar questions about the usefulness and work around colour coding of open access pathways. There are, it seems, many who may not be accessing our support as well. When it came to researchers' experience using various pathways to open access, the tables turned a little bit. Here we explained the various pathways to the researchers as part of the question. We didn't use the colours at all. So even though we've got the colours in the graph here, for instance, for Diamond, it would say choosing a journal that is free to publish in and free to read. We expected the high results here for read and publish, but we were a bit surprised by the 44% who claimed experience publishing Diamond Open Access. This relates to in ongoing work around Diamond Open Access, because I have a sneaking suspicion that there is some confusion, at least within our research community, I suspect more broadly, about how read and publish works and how it's distinct from Diamond Open Access publishing. We were also surprised by perceived barriers to open access. Despite years of work we'd spent promoting the repository as a free pathway for open access for articles in journals like Nature and The Lancet, more than 60% of respondents identified cost as a barrier to open access. As library staff, we know that there are many pathways to open access with no cost attached, but getting the message out remains a key barrier, even if the researchers don't know that that's the real barrier there rather than cost. To address this barrier, which is informing researchers what open access options are available to them, we wanted a sense of where our researchers could be found, particularly online. At JCU, you can see from the graph here, it turned out that that's LinkedIn. Platforms like X, Blue Sky, and Instagram simply didn't even register the needle in comparison to the results we got from LinkedIn and regular readers of the conversation. More users were using ChatGPT than any of the major platforms that we associate with social media communication. Obviously, this has been a whirlwind tour of just some of the survey results that we obtained from this instrument, but we do have a detailed report of findings housed in our repository, of course. The DOI is there, but you can also reliably get there by searching JCU Open Access Survey 2025-2026. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. And next, we have Hannah Foster and Jess Miller from Flinders University.
Thank you, Jayshree. I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, hopefully they're looking all okay there. Can everyone see those? Yeah, okay, I can see a nod. Lovely, thank you. So hi, I'm Hannah, and together with my teammate Jess, we're going to take you through Open Access Week at Flinders and Experience Memoir. Jess and I are joining you today from the lands of the Kaurna people. We also are lucky enough to be neighbours, and so we live and raise our families on Peremank country in the Adelaide Hills. We'd like to pay our deepest respect to elders past, present and emerging. What we're sharing today really is how our flagship Open Access Week event has taken shape over the last few years. I'll be really frank, this is not a neat and tidy success story, but more of a series of well-intentioned attempts that had us feeling out what's worked and what hasn't worked so well. If we rewind to 2023 and 2024, our events were fairly formal. We ran really quite structured launches with tightly timed run sheets and panels made up of quite senior members of our research community here at Flinders. Our focus was really on explaining what open access is and why it matters. And the experience really reflected that. So people came along, they sat down and they listened. Both years also included a ceremonial cake cutting. With a bit of hindsight, that feels pretty on brand with that version of the event. By 2025, we started to shift things. We weren't overly dramatic, but we decided on a few key small decisions. So like moving from a panel to an in-conversation event. We simplified the format and tried to loosen the structure a bit so that things could run a little less tightly. we had a growing sense that explanation wasn't the only goal and that there was value in creating a setting where people could think about open access alongside us. And in fact, the idea of co-creating knowledge with our colleagues from around the university was increasingly appealing. Then, over the last year, we've started to notice another shift, and that's what brings us to today. I'll pass over to Jess now for the next part of our Flinders Uni Open Access story.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. I'd like to touch first on our choice of subtitle for this presentation because it is a little gimmicky, but it also frames the evolution of our approach to Open Access Week. In particular, it's this word memoir that we really like here, and we like it for two reasons. Firstly, being connected with the word memory, it inspires a retelling and interpretation of personal experience as opposed to just stating the facts or explaining the systems. We're also interested in the ancient Greek and Roman use of memoir as memo. In this context, we can picture memoirs to be pieces of unfinished and unpublished writing, which may be used as a memory aid to support a more finished piece of writing later on. We've been considering Open Access Week as a vehicle for both definitions of memoir. Across the week, we hope to hear stories that are unique and poignant on their own, but we're also ultimately hoping that these stories will lead to a better understanding of open access and aid the library and our research community in writing a bigger and more complete story. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for us, this year's theme, The Cost of Knowledge, not only refers to paywalls and APCs, but to the budgetary cost of Open Access Week itself. We found ourselves considering how far we could take it, questioning previous costs such as superfluous catering, lavish speaker gifts, and the precious resource that is library staff time. Every time we talked, we became even more convinced that going lean in our event planning was not only a way of adding value to what we did offer, but was also quite an anarchic and satisfying way of reflecting on the cost of our own knowledge. Our 2026 flagship event will be held in the same location as last year's. We have invited guest speakers, some of them senior. We are still planning an event centered in questions, answers, and discussion. We still hope against all hope to run to schedule, but we are proposing to do a few key things differently. So our event plans to forego a stage for a circle of chairs, among which our key speakers will be mixed in with our event attendees. We're hoping that this will foster an organic grassroots sharing of experience, where wisdom is exchanged as a common good rather than bestowed from the front, and where we can give all participants equal voice. We want to loosely structure discussion around what we're calling hot takes, provocative icebreakers which will ignite discussion but have no control over the direction or the shape that this discussion takes. Instead of fancy, expensive gifts, we want to handwrite thank you letters to our guests. Instead of a catering feast, much of which was left over last year, we want to offer a simple choice between gold and green donuts to encourage a greater awareness of alternative publishing models. Instead of a standard live stream offering controlled by our IT services, we're playing around with the idea of a podcast controlled by us to represent a format that is free-flowing, easy to access, and is shaped by the people in the room. Our intention is then to publish the podcast episode Open Access with a CC BY license and explore a playful campaign continuing long after October that strongly encourages reuse and hopefully some derivation. And I'll throw back to Hannah to close us off.
And that's where we're at for now, really. We're really looking forward to what this year brings. And we'd just like to say that if you have any experience running something like this, or any advice, or even an open access hot take, we'd love to hear from you. Our details are on the screen, and I'll get a bit closer to the camera because if you do happen to be at the Call Vendor event in Melbourne on Thursday, you're also welcome to grab me then as well. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much. And next we have Ben Chadwick from Deakin doing a presentation also on behalf of his colleagues, Caitlin Savage, Mazia Asghari, and Natalie Yablonsky. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to try and share, and hopefully you'll see my slides and not my speaker notes. Okay, Shri. So what no, you've probably just seen my. Okay, how are we going? Any nods? Great. So as already mentioned, I was supposed to be co-presenting today, but a mixture of illness and other exciting things happening at Deakin mean that it's just me, so hopefully I can answer any questions. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which I'm speaking from today, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. So jumping right in, Where Should I Publish is an online tool to help Deakin researchers choose journals for maximum impact. It provides journal information, open access data and rankings, letting researchers compare options, understand read and publish agreements, and align their publishing choices with their goals. The tool moved from our research office to being the library's responsibility in 2024. And shortly after, our Open Access Task Force recommended an uplift of that tool to align with Deakin's Open Research Position Statement. Over 12 months, our scholarly comms and experienced design teams collaborated to redesign Where Should I Publish, to refresh the interface, expand filtering options, broaden data sources, and rebuild the database. So I will show you on the next slide some screenshots of the tool, but that's not really the focus today. I'm really wanting to be a little bit more on the nerdy side and talk about some of the technical aspects of the database redesign. So as mentioned, here's some screenshots showing the main search interface and some of the filtering options. The existing Where Should I Publish tool was a PHP application with an Oracle database. And from the outset, we just assumed we'd sort of just be replicating something like that on library servers, with the proviso that there were some key challenges we needed to address in the redesign. So to achieve our open access discovery objectives, we needed to bring in some new data points, and that meant integrating with new data sources. Also, administration of the old system was extremely difficult. Even making small edits to individual journals' data involved manually running a complex series of SQL queries directly on the database. We needed a more user-friendly and automated administration environment. As the project progressed, we realized we needed to rethink how we were going to approach the back-end architecture. Now, at some point it dawned on us that we already had a system that maintained a comprehensive database of journals that integrated with a lot of the data sources we already needed to harvest metadata from for Where Should I Publish. And that system was our Research Information Management System, Symplectic Elements. So we began investigating how we could make Elements the source of truth system for our journal metadata management, which would then feed into Where Should I Publish. Now, importantly, this solution would also mean we could leverage Elements' administrative interface for managing data in the back end. And there's just some screenshots here of the journal search interface in Elements and the journal information screen in Elements. So now we'll get stuck into a little bit of how it works. Someone else did these slides, so hopefully I can get the automations right. All Elements journals have records containing metadata from different data sources, such as Web of Science, Scopus, Sherpa Romeo, etc. And each journal can also have labels applied to the journal at the journal level. So we use these labels to add data from new data sources that we wanted to use in Where Should I Publish? And each data field has its own label scheme. So on the left there, you can see some of the data sources we were integrating with and bringing in labels to Elements. We'd aggregate the journal records together to create a manual record that we called a JBOB, or a journal best of breed record. So that brought all of the different data source records into one record, and that allowed us to maintain the metadata from sources and control what goes into Where Should I Publish. So from there, that journal JBOB record and the labels were exported into the Where Should I Publish database, which then fed into the actual tool on the front end that users would use. So the key advantages of doing this were efficiency. Rather than building something entirely new, we were able to leverage an existing system that we already knew and trusted and understood. And this meant the implementation was a lot faster, there were lower overheads and less duplication of effort. And we were able to consolidate data management into a single location. This also was a really solution that scaled well. So the approach was inherently flexible. It meant we could onboard new data sources anytime we needed as things evolve, and drop off data sources if that became relevant too. So yeah, that was really quick. Hopefully it's just raised some questions for you, and you can get in touch with us if you do at the email address there. And I'd just like to acknowledge all the colleagues who were involved. I'm happy to chat with you about more of this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ben. And finally, we have Julie Cohen from University of Melbourne. Thank you.
My apologies, everyone. I was on mute. Hello, it is a pleasure to be here today presenting to you all from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations. I'm also representing our broader project team, Dimity Flanagan and Zach Kendall. Today, I'm speaking about our recently completed journal Lookup Tool project, which went live yesterday as the journal Open Pathways Explorer, or JOPE, which is how we're referring to it now. I'll be sharing a link with you at the end of the presentation so you can have a look at it yourselves. And the timeline that I'm talking about today is the implementation phase. So really that ran from February to June this year. And I'll be examining our project priorities and how they evolved as we approached going live. I called this talk today Making Open More Visible to reference the guiding principle at the heart of this project. We wanted to create an openly searchable tool that would uncover more open access pathways for researchers preparing to publish. We also wanted to reduce some of the manual work involved in keeping our resources up to date by automating the ingest of data from multiple sources. Central to this project was also improving the user experience. As a broader project team came together, things needed to shift and change. We were working with a really compressed timeline, which influenced how much we could play or investigate our options. We also had to balance our priorities with the realities of the platform and the time we had available. The complexities of the open access landscape were sometimes really difficult to convey to the rest of the project team. So this impacted on our ability to make quick decisions. We also received a lot of feedback during testing, which meant we had to go over some of the old ground. So how did this play out in reality? Based on the outcomes of the discovery phase, an in-house build using the Django platform was endorsed. One of the first decisions we made was that it should be a publicly accessible tool to search, and this would have some implications on other decisions that I'll talk about soon. The search functionality of our tool is also somewhat driven by the capabilities of the platform, with additional developments determined as out of scope for this current phase of the project. Where are we at now? JOPE is now openly available, providing the ability to search by title, publisher, or keyword. This is a huge improvement on our previous model, which were static lists of journal titles with coverage information. However, the search functionality is still quite simplistic. More advanced search functions are planned, but these were a casualty of the shorter timeline. Next, providing access to more open pathways beyond our agreements and covered titles was really the driving aim of the project. We would have liked to provide more, but again, due to time, we had to make some decisions quickly to ensure we could complete the project within the allocated time and budget. I would say that we were partially successful in accomplishing this priority. Our tool brings together our covered titles and discount lists for the first time and puts them alongside other titles that come from the directory of open access journals. Researchers can now access more than 30,000 potential journal titles to publish in, alongside information about article processing charges and links to further information. However, we also wanted to integrate repository open access pathways to complete the picture, but there was limited time to troubleshoot the technical roadblocks alongside other priorities. It should be said, we felt able to compromise on this due to the current landscape of agreements, particularly the lack of caps on hybrid journals. Should this change, we may need to make this a priority enhancement. During the discovery phase, the work required to manually maintain our resources was recognised as a burden on the team, so automation became a key efficiency priority. Somewhat ironically, the open nature of our tool determined to some extent the data sources we could ingest. For example, there were some APIs we chose not to use because they were from subscription tools. Had we chosen to put JOPE behind a login, we may have had more options here. We also found that the automated ingest is reliant on the data sources being consistent and readily available. We have a scheduled ingest of data, so if the formatting or location of the files has changed, it becomes difficult to import the feed. Where we landed on this was to schedule a weekly feed from the call title list and the DOAJ journal list, supplemented with our list of discounts and a publication feed from Elements. To mitigate some of the risks, we can make manual changes in the back end, but we need to get the balance right between accuracy of data and reducing the manual load. You'll see here, this is a snapshot of our error log, so you can see how complex some of these changes might be. Manual changes also need to be locked to stop it being overridden by the next ingest. So you can see it's pretty complex. Finally, how did we track against user experience? The short answer is we don't really know yet, as it's only just gone live, but based on our testing, it's looking positive. Testers came from our targeted user group, so we got a good cross-section of feedback. Few defects were identified and resolved. Some confusing issues were flagged that we used to improve our support documentation, and we got a high number of positive comments on the improved user experience overall. We'll keep gathering feedback. So that's it. JOPE is now live. We invite you to take a look when you get a chance, and certainly send through any positive or constructive feedback to our email address that is listed at the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the presenters for some really great presentations there. And there's quite a few questions waiting as well. So there's some there for you, Wayne. Firstly, were there differences across disciplines, career stages, or researcher cohorts that stood out in the survey?
Yeah, those details are in the report, as you know, Jayshree. But broadly speaking, science researchers had a better understanding of open access than HAS. I think that's probably down to volume and publishing experience. And also, they spend more time talking to us because they publish more often, I suspect. What was another one there, Jayshree?
Another question.
Oh, wasn't there more to that?
Yes, so disciplines, career stages, and research cohorts.
Yes. HDRs, I think from memory, HDRs and ECRs had the least understanding. Senior researchers had the most. Again, a lot of it's down to experience. I think what it reflects is that researchers learn things by doing, and it's by being there at that point of contact when they need to publish something, and being able to at that point go, okay, here are your options. You can make this open access at no charge for you by giving us a copy in the repository of the manuscript. Those kind of moments are the teaching moments. I can't help think, Jayshree, of our colleague Siggy, who's become a massive open access advocate because we've been there at moments when he's gone, oh, does this mean I can do this? And we're like, yes, let's help you do that. I think that confers more teaching moments. I don't know. I think the evidence suggests that confers more teaching moments than passive or large scale information dumps. I might be wrong.
And very quickly, one more for you. There's a question from Danny asking why you included ChatGPT as a social media option.
Curiosity. I think that was decided as a whole of library series of options, and I think we were curious. We wanted to know. They could select multiple options, so we just wanted to see how many were using ChatGPT.
Thank you, Wayne. Now there's a couple of questions for Ben. Ben, can you measure engagement with your tool?
Yeah, great question. We do. We can both on Google Analytics, but also we're taking server data logs on the server. We haven't analyzed that yet, but from the very sneak peek that I've looked into, it seems like we're getting a lot of interest from graduate researchers who tend to more come in and just do a broad filters on field of research, for example, what's out there. Whereas more established researchers will come in and sort of know what journals they want to look at and get some specific information about read and publish agreements, for example.
Okay, so there's a related question. What have you learned about how researchers use the tool for making publishing decisions? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd defer to one of my colleagues for a better answer on that, but more specifically, we'd love to dive into that data and see that as it comes in. We've been collecting about 4 months of data now, so I think the time's right to get a feel for that.
Thank you. And there's a question for Jess and Hannah. Have you seen an in the round format work before?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the short answer is no. And that's because I haven't been to an event of that style before. What we have noticed is working though is more casual events. So we're hoping that we can facilitate the format into a success. But if not, we're really happy, and our leadership really gives us the space to, chalk it up as a learning and come back next year with either a new idea or very humbly with a return to a format that we've ID'd as working previously.
Thank you. And Julie, there's a question for you. Did you examine options for integrating the JISC API?
We did. We did a fair bit of background work. Ultimately, our developer found some technical hitches at his end that we tried to mitigate by, meeting with some colleagues. So thank you to those people we met with. In the end, we were really struggling with the time frame, and it is one of the priority enhancements for the next phase. But we're moving into business as usual. Once we get past this initial phase of launch, we'll move into business as usual, and it will become a bit more needing to make a request for additional support. It is definitely a priority. We are looking into it.
Okay, good to know. And finally, a question for Ben or Julie. What was your position on the commercial journal finding tools out there, such as those by consortia managers and SciFi?
You go,
Sorry,
Julie,
Ben.
because that's something Kaitlyn on my team would be best placed to answer. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, I can only speak to it. I've been in this role since January, so I wasn't part of the discovery phase. But what I do know is that when the discovery project was being undertaken, the priorities of it really were determining the outcome. And one of the biggest issues was the automated ingest of data. And my understanding is that at the time, there weren't many tools out there that would facilitate that in the same way. I do believe things have evolved since then. So if we'd waited another 6 months, we might have made a different decision. But, c'est la vie, the project was funded. We now have something that we can talk about as being an in-house build and all of the different implications of that.
Yeah, I'll just really quickly jump into and say that our brief was to, I guess, replicate the existing in-house tool, especially since there were some Deakin specific data in there, such as rankings from Deakin Business School and Deakin Law School that needed to be incorporated. So I guess that was just where we're going to go in the end anyway, building it in-house.
Okay, thank you very much. We might leave it there. There are still a couple more questions there, Julie and Ben, if you'd like to go in and respond to those online. And we're going to give you another quick 5-minute break now before the next session. Thank you.
Kia ora, everyone. Welcome back. I'm very excited to introduce our next speakers, Janet Catterall, Jane Bowland, and Danny Kingsley. Over to you.
I'm waiting for Janet to share the slides. So,
yeah, sorry, it's not doing what I expected it would do. Hang on.
So the title was Your Roadmap to Rights Retention, New Resources from Open Access Australasia.
do you think I'll need to share?
Got it. Sorry.
Okay,
It's
cool.
because it's a different Zoom room. It moved on me. Okay, sorry. You can see it, right?
I can see it. Can everybody else see it? Okay. Getting a thumbs up from Danny, so that's all hunky-dory. Ready to go. So first of all, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and traditional knowledge holders of Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand, particularly recognising that Western concepts of IP, copyright and open access are often not inclusive of First Nations cultures and community views. I currently live and work on Wiradjuri country in New South Wales. So rights retention simply means retaining your copyright when you sign an agreement with a publisher. The agreement that researchers sign, or more commonly, the box they tick when the article is accepted, often assigns copyright to the publisher or gives the publisher an exclusive license to the copyright. With rights retention, you assert your right and the university's right to the IP in the work at submission. The publisher gets the right to publish the final version with their typesetting, layout, and style, but doesn't acquire all the rights under copyright. So assigning copyright gives the publisher full control over how you and others can use the work, plus a free license for them to profit from the content. Retaining copyright means you can reuse and share the article however and whenever you want to. So why does it matter? Well, firstly, researchers invest the time, expertise, and intellect, so why hand over the control to a big for-profit business? Secondly, university research is funded by taxpayers, not by publishers. Public, communities, practitioners, and policymakers should have access to research outputs. Third, many funders now require immediate open access to research outputs, recognizing that it should be publicly accessible, taxpayer. Researchers can pay for open access, but author processing charges can be expensive and the costs exclude researchers without access to funds. Read and publish deals can help by covering APCs through university libraries, but they do not remove the cost. Universities, supported by taxpayers, are still paying, and these deals cannot cover every publisher, so they limit where researchers publish and widen inequity between institutions. Copyright has often been undervalued by academics, but publishers understand its value very well. The for-profit scholarly publishing industry depends on acquiring and controlling copyright, and that control is becoming even more valuable with generative AI. As AI companies pay for access to high-quality scholarly content through licensing deals, publishers have increased incentives to lock content down and raise the costs of open access. Open access charges fuel a huge scholarly communications black market of predatory publishers, which fuels paper mills and AI-generated academic fraud. Rights retention keeps high-quality research outputs available through institutional repositories, reduces publisher control, and supports a more equitable scholarly communication system. So how does it actually work? Well, rights retention is grounded in copyright legislation and employment contracts. Employers own the copyright in works created as part of employment, unless otherwise agreed in writing. That's the default under the Copyright Act. For university researchers, this means the university technically owns the copyright in scholarly works, even though that ownership has not been enforced. This creates uncertainty in publishing contracts because researchers technically cannot give away the rights they do not own. Institutional rights retention strategies clarify the position. The university retains the rights needed to use the work and make it open access, while giving researchers freedom to choose where they publish. Rights retention statements notify publishers that these rights exist and cannot be overridden by the publishing contract. That was a very quick snapshot, and I'm going to hand over to Danny to carry on.
Thanks, Jane. And hello, everyone, from Meanjin in Brisbane. I'm just talking a bit about what can be done, like who can do what in this space. And as Jane was just explaining, a lot of this has to do actually with the Copyright Act and then what subsequently happens once you start working for an institution. So a researcher is bound by a couple of things. One is their IP policy and also their enterprise agreement. And so a researcher can have a look and understand what that IP policy is re copyright. In Australia, the majority of our IP policies give the ownership of the copyright back to the institution, and then there may or may not be a license that comes back to the institution. It all gets very confusing, but mostly the IP for scholarly outputs is owned by the author of the work. There's a couple of instances where not, and at Deakin we're in the process of trying to change that ourselves. So even just understanding what the rules are in your own institution is a really good start, is what I'm saying. It's also a good idea to ask your library or your research office, depends on the institution, about where this information is being managed, whether or not the funder for the work that you are doing and publishing does require rights retention. Some do and some don't. And certainly if it does require rights retention, it's a good idea to talk to the library or the research office if there is an approach in the institution on rights retention. So understanding, one, your legal situation, and two, the funding situation. Regardless, it is always a good idea to deposit your author-accepted manuscript, that's the final peer-reviewed and corrected version of the work, into the institutional repository when it's been accepted. Depending on what is happening with the IP policy, what happens with rights retention, etc., will determine when or it can be made openly available. The library will look after that. And then if you are unsure about a publisher agreement, it's a really good idea to talk to the library before signing it. This is tricky sometimes because it comes up as a click-through as you're working your way through. It's one of those things that's like the last thing you could be bothered with. You want to press the button. It's a really good idea to maintain a copy of it as well, because I know from experience talking to researchers about what the copyright arrangement is for a particular article, usually they don't know and they haven't kept a copy of the agreement. So we're sort of working on some eyes and looking up on what the general situation is for that journal. So moving on to the library staff, and I think they're probably a big chunk of the people listening today are library staff. You also would do well to know what your IP policy situation is in your own institution and understanding what that means. If you are in a circumstance, which is, most of us, that where the IP is owned by the author, the whole process is going to be a lot easier to manage, particularly in relation to the embargo question, if the IP is actually owned by the institution. So that means a change to the IP policy. 1000% acknowledge that's not straightforward. We're in the middle of trying to get that happening in Deakin, but it will certainly help things further down the track. Great idea to build some researcher-facing guidance explaining rights retention in easy-to-understand language. And don't we love a LibGuide? Come on, there's another excuse to make one. And we should also support our researchers to understand publisher agreements. And I know we've been trying to do it for 20 years, but we can keep going. It's becoming more top of mind for our academic community. They are slowly starting to grasp that this actually does matter, which is really helpful. Really, we need to promote green open access and the institutional repository. They have been poor second cousins to the read and publish agreements, who've been the sexy stars for the last few years. We really need to be pushing green open access, the institutional repository, why it matters, who's using it, getting some good news stories out of the usage of the material. What are your mostly used material in there, so that you can demonstrate that this is of value, it's not a waste of time. We've got Open Access Australasia and call networks, and that they're great to jump into to share approaches and resources and questions. So join the communities of practice. And then in terms of university leaders, and this really is probably us talking to the university leaders, because I'm not sure that there's an enormous number of university leaders listening to this discussion, but having rights retention in university policy is very helpful. So, for example, Deakin has a position statement on open research, and we've got some outcomes that were agreed to by big task forces that say we want rights retention, which is very, very useful to reference when we're having these conversations further down the track. Understanding at an institutional level that read and publish agreements are good for individual researchers, but they, as across the market, are problematic because they further concentrate all of the publishing into a small number of organisations, and that means that those organisations manage the market, control the market, and control us. It reduces a word called bibliodiversity, which will come up with a little red line underneath it when you type it, because Microsoft Word, I'm not sure, is really interested in a broad market. Anyway, that's just my personal opinion. And we want to also really want the university to encourage an adoption and support for alternative publishing models like Diamond, Open Access. Now, the next bit's really important for that, because DORA, Declaration on Research Assessment, is about and COARA is another organisation, but really the research assessment question is so crucial here, because if the focus is on university rankings and Q1 and S, and everyone's got these KPIs on having to publish in certain places, that works counter to things like Diamond OA. So there is really a whole approach that needs to be taken to make something shift here. So that's the end of me talking. I'll hand over to Janet.
Hi everyone, kia ora. I'm here on stunning Yamini country, which is the Atherton tableland, so I'm on the land of the Ngurungaji Nation. Very happy to be here. Just give you a tiny bit of background and then we'll have a look at the website that we've been building. OAA is completely membership driven, so members pay our fees, and so we do what our members need, and at least that's what we try to do. And at our AGM in 2025, it was clear that members wanted a space to talk to each other about topics that were particularly concerning to them. And the topic that was most concerning in 2025, according to our members, was rights retention. So we held our Open Access Australasia member forum. And what came out of that was a couple of actions. Our members wanted resources, helpful tools, guidelines that could all be collected together and used, that the community could access and use to help them navigate this really quite complicated area. And so we formed this working group from member institutions. We also had some help from some additional people in terms of this first beginnings of the site, who are listed on the slide. So thank you to them as well. And so this is the graphic from the central landing page. I'm going to pull up the QR code just in case anyone wants to follow along. I'll try to run through this briefly. But this central graphic is just showing the importance of rights retention for authors, for community, the research community, and for society in general. And everything on our site is CC BY unless it's otherwise marked, which means we didn't write it. Basically, anything we've written is free for anyone to grab and reuse. So I'll just pop over there. Bear in mind, this is a work in progress. So all you're going to see today is the real bare bones of what we've started to build. So we've got the central graphic here, which you can grab and play around with if you want. We've got a basic definition. We've got an explanation of why is OAA interested in rights retention, because it's essential for open scholarship. So underneath that, we have 5 sections, and each of these link out to another page where we're starting to populate with resources. And I do want to emphasize this is a community project as well as community, our open community being able to access it. We're really hoping that you'll give us feedback, give us material and ideas as to what else would be helpful for you in this resource. So in our starter kit, we've got 5 different audiences that we're building in here. Each audience has its own set of FAQs. So this is the research support staff one. There's another resource here that Jane's actually written, how to implement institutional rights retention. We've got some PowerPoint templates that you can grab, take away, tweak, and use if you need to explain rights retention to researchers, or if you want to advocate for policy change, you can grab these things rather than reinventing the wheel. We also have this second section is touching on the implications of rights retention for Indigenous research. And Jane kind of alluded to this in her acknowledgement at the beginning. We've included this section to acknowledge that conventional rights retention models are built around this Western individual proprietary rights. They don't reflect Indigenous knowledge systems. It doesn't serve those knowledge systems which are collective and relational. So for Indigenous researchers and Indigenous communities, questions of control and governance over their knowledges goes way beyond a publisher contract, right? So we've made a tiny start here. Anything further in this work on this page, we'll be seeking to engage with Indigenous colleagues to lead this. So underneath that, we've got our case studies. At the moment, we only have 3, but each case study will have one of these above it, which is basically who did what, why did they do it, and how. And then underneath that, we have a table of challenges and solutions and a timeline. So, and then we follow this up with a little video. So each of these will have this. If your institution wants to add a case study, you're very welcome to do so. We can do a quick video. We can give you the template to fill in. And then these last 2 are pretty self-explanatory. We've got definitions and glossary of terms. What is copyright? What is rights? What's this language mean in a publisher contract? This glossary is not exhaustive. So again, when you have a look through it, you'll see terms that we've missed. Please contact us, let us know. And then finally, we sent out a survey earlier this year and we asked, what policies do you have? What guidelines do you have? And our respondents sent us in links. We've just compiled them into one place. So if you need examples of policies or guidelines, they're there. And again, we'll add to this as more people respond and send us their info. So thank you very much. And that's a quick, brief glimpse at the site. Thanks to everyone who's contributed. And bear in mind, this is a work in progress. There's not much there yet, but we're really, really hoping to get feedback from you all. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I certainly know from experience that rights retention is fun to go to academics and researchers and explain compared to, say, read and publish deals. So that resource is fantastic. We've got quite a few questions, so I'll just pick a couple. Looking at that table there, how do we, if someone wanted to start embedding rights retention policies, or how do we support our institutions to strengthen their approach to rights retention, essentially? How do we get more of those institutions to have a rights retention policy?
That is such a complicated question. I don't know where to start with that. I mean, I think what we're trying to do with the resources is put out, these are some of the things that you can use, first of all, to raise awareness. And then in time, when we build it out more, we'll have more detailed explanations about what are the different ways that institutions have tried to implement this, but also what are the problems, the drawbacks, the pros and the cons. It really depends on a lot of things. What is your IP policy? What is, is your open access policy and your IP policy lined up? Yeah, so what you have here is not, this is how you do it. What you have is a collection of different tools and resources that people can look at. Do either Danny or Jane, do you want to add to that?
Yes, it's...
Go for it, Danny. I was just going to say, have a look at the case studies, because a lot of it is about getting stakeholders on board and getting people. You've got to work changing policy. So it's quite a big job. But yeah, you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. And
Danny will probably have better ideas.
Low-hanging fruit that you can start out with.
And with all advocacy, it is about trying to identify within the institution what's going to resonate. If you've got an institution that's talking about social license, for example, that's a really good thing to sort of leverage from, to say, well, part of our social license is ensuring that people can read the research that we have. You might want to be pushing the sovereignty question. That's another one. This question around sovereignty of our own research in terms of if we're relying on preprints, servers overseas, if we're relying on publishers, servers overseas, and they may or may not in this current geopolitical environment be around in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. Emerald just got bought out by Wiley, for example, so it's very fluid environment. So you could sort of push the suggestion that having a copy of all of the research outputs of the university actually on site is not a bad idea. So it depends on what's sort of going to resonate with the people you're speaking to within your own institution. Listen to what the VC says when they do their kind of town hall sessions. What are the sorts of things they are emphasising? Is there anything in there you can leverage from? So that's the big picture, because the longer work that Jane's talking about, that's going to need to hit the big picture people. But then, yes, the lower hanging fruit are, do you have a friendly academic or a few that you can test things out with and give things a go?
Thank you. There's a couple more questions there, but I might get you to answer them, and if you can type an answer, that would be fantastic. And I'm going to switch over with Jayshree now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna, and I am pleased to welcome back Danny for the next presentation.
Okay, so it's me again, folks. I'm just going to share my presentation and then go to presentation mode. And I hope that you're seeing the right version. Are you seeing the full slides rather than... Yep, great, thank you. All right. Welcome, everybody, to a conversation about all the opens at once. I'm speaking to you, as I mentioned, from Meanjin on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, although I work at Deakin University, which is down in Melbourne with the lands of the Wadrong people. And I'd like to acknowledge and really, you may know that we've been going through a little bit of some turmoil at Deakin, and I like at the moment to feel there's a little bit of sort of comfort in the knowledge of the length of generations and tens of thousands of years of knowledge that the Indigenous people have had with the lands on which we are able to live and work. And that, to me, that continuity and length of care and custodianship is actually a real source of comfort in a time of turmoil. So today I'm talking about all the opens, and just starting with just a tiny bit of history, we sort of started talking about the opens in the form that we talk about them now with open access. I acknowledge that there was open source well before this, but really the kind of conversations that we are now having began with the open access conversation. And those two two images on the right are the two 2003 statements. One happened in April at Bethesda and the other one in October in Berlin. And they were both statements that talked about this new thing called open access. And then a few years later, through Open Access, what was the Australian Open Access Support Group, which became Open Access Australasia, benefits of open sort of resource that came out that's been very popular since. So we started talking only about open access. But a few years later, data became part of the conversation. And I remember at ANU when the Australian National Data Service gave some money out in 2009 to the different institutions to try and organise for, I think it was 50 data sets to get into a repository within the year from the amount of money that each institution was given. My colleague who was taking responsibility for that, Lisa, said to me, "Can you not come along with me? I don't want to talk about open next to because people get scared with the open when it comes to the data question. So with the research data originally was really about managing it, and we still kind of don't necessarily talk about open data. We talk about as open as possible, closed as necessary, etc. So those sort of conversations started. Research data started coming into the discussion in Australia quite early comparatively to other parts of the world in 2009. By the time I got to the UK, 2015, there was starting to be rumblings around some of the funders saying, if we're funding your work, you need to provide evidence of the claims you're making in the papers and provide a link to the data. So suddenly it became a part of the conversation. And we jump forward 10 years or so, and suddenly open is all of it. And so now we've got the 2021 recommendation on open science from UNESCO, which talks about open scientific knowledge, structure, science infrastructure, engagement of societal actors, and dialogue with other knowledge systems, which is what Janet was just discussing. And then on the right-hand side there's another sort of different version of a similar thing, which is talking about research software, methods, evaluation, educational resources, citizen science, infrastructure, open access, and so on. So we've moved very much from this focus on open access to the entire research lifecycle. Now, just a quick conversation around language. And Wayne mentioned language in terms of the colours that are used for open, and that's not necessarily particularly useful as a mechanism. Language is quite complicated in this space, partly because we use quite vernacular words like publish, for example, when they can mean quite specific things. And there is sometimes some appropriation of language to people's advantages. You'll notice in the UNESCO and the other graphic there, we talked about open science, and that's within the context of the word scienta, which is a Latin word for knowledge, and it is intended to mean all research. So all knowledge, but it is not necessarily interpreted that way by the arts and humanities and social sciences, certainly in the UK and in Australia, in my experience. And so we've tended to use other terms. So while the NHMRC and MR, the Medical Research Futures Fund, have just put out an open science policy, you'll find that in different institutions, other languages being used. So the University of Manchester has an Office for Open Research. Deakin has an open research position statement. When we pulling together what was going to be an open access policy, we then thought, let's make it an open science policy to meet the requirement of the NHMRC and MRFF policy, but we're going to call it an open research policy because it fits with our other language used in the institution. However, at University of Melbourne and RMIT, they've taken the language to mean open scholarship, because open research doesn't include the concept of open education. So these things loosely mean the same thing, but not exactly. So let's talk about open educational resources. I worked for a little while about a year for OAPEN, which is a library of open access books and also the affiliated organisation, the Directory of Open Access Books. By definition, they are not textbooks in that library. So they are monographs, they're research outputs. However, when I started with a couple of colleagues having a look at the usage of the material, it became very clear, and you can see in this graphic here, that through the open syllabus work that is done, the sources of open educational resources, the sources of material that's been used for the purposes of teaching and learning in institutions in Australia are actually more monographs than they are open textbooks. So when we start talking about open educational resources like there's some sort of weird outlier thing that's separate to research outputs, it doesn't make sense. They are both being used for the purposes of education. So we've started to break down some of these distinctions between them. Now, the mechanisms and the needs for open started with sort of concepts of there's profiteering happening, there's needs for equity, we've got funding requirements, there's all these reasons why we want to make material open. But the landscape's shifting a little bit, and open's starting to take a different role. So here is a couple of articles about the situation in Australia and research integrity. Unlike other countries, Australia doesn't have an office for research integrity. It's all managed in-house within the institutions. And there's been many calls for an office of research integrity, a bit like the Corruption Commission, that sort of thing, that have been rejected and rejected and rejected. Now, this paper that came out in May this year on the right-hand side was looking at, well, how accountable are these the different processes within institutions? Turns out not very. So we're not, as institutions, adopting robust policies. Look, there's an understandable way of doing this. You don't want to have embarrassment for the institution. We're really, focused in Australia on university rankings because that's what brings in the students, that brings in the funds to keep us going, etc., etc. However, that we do have a bit of an image problem because of this research integrity issue. Well, what can help with that? Who knew? If science has got a credibility problem, guess what helps? Openness. So open science or open research or open scholarship, whichever term you want to use, but being open is a mechanism to help with the credibility of the research that's coming out, because we're not hiding behind anything. We're saying you check the numbers yourself if you want. There they are. So we've got a benefit here from making our work open. It's useful to the institution to demonstrate credibility. And that can be one of your arguments for rights retention, by the way. So there's work that's being done on this questions around open and transparency, open and integrity. So these are definitely, there's definite linkages that we can now demonstrate between the two, which are fantastic from our point of view. If you're somebody that is pro-open, these sorts of arguments really help. They're going to help potentially a lot more than the social good argument, because sometimes that's a bit of a, pat on the head kind of, yes, sure, mother statement. Integrity and research integrity, especially in our current environment, is going to hit home. Now, if we start looking at the question about AI and open, this is a really, really uneasy relationship, because AI needs open and in fact is a parasite on open and is causing a lot of problems to do with just the way we can manage our infrastructure, and also just in terms of queries like people not wanting to make their theses open access because they're worried about it being scraped by AI, or publishers getting more locking down further the ability to make even abstracts open access because they can monetize that material by selling it to AI companies. So there's all sorts of reasons why AI and open sit very uneasily with one another. And if we're thinking about open, including open infrastructure, this is where it really hits home. And so these two articles are making the case that open infrastructure needs systematic support. So the CERN article, which is on the left-hand side, is talking about open access has got to move beyond transformative agreements and start really thinking about supporting open infrastructure at scale. And the article on the right is talking about the critical digital open infrastructure needs funding, because a lot of industry relies on open infrastructure and is not supporting it. And what we're finding with AI is it's changing the way open infrastructure is needed to operate. It's not just the bot attacks that we're having to manage. It's things like, because of the slop and the kind of the at-scale paper mill material that's starting to be coming through the front door, things like preprint servers are starting to increase moderation. Archive is now saying, that's the one on the right-hand side, is saying, if you're using AI in your papers, you're going to be banned from a year from being able to put material into archive. So the whole processes that these open infrastructures are having to manage and run are having to adapt to address the problem with the tsunami of material that's coming through, the AI-produced material. So open infrastructure needs support, and it needs support more than it ever did because of the increased problems we've got with AI. And so what this article from Digital Science is talking about is that because a lot of this infrastructure is often grant-funded budgets, and the problem with grant funding is grants like to fund new shiny things, not just ongoing support for something that is already established. We've seen this time and time again with something stood up on a grant, and then it's quite challenging to keep it going. And so this article is making the note that if a swarm of AI scrapers mirror entire collections, the cost of being open rises sharply. And so we've got a problem. So this is part of in library space, our new role. So research institutions, of which we are part, and so this is part of our argument that we need to take up to our research institutions, is research institutions are long-term stewards of the scholarly record. This comes back to that question that I was saying before about the whole question about sovereignty and ensuring that our institutions have copies of works that we're producing, so that if something else goes awry somewhere else in the world, then we've at least got a copy of our own research outputs. It's a pretty basic thing to be thinking we should be maintaining. So if we're long-term stewards of the scholarly record, how are we managing this? What are we doing to support that scholarly infrastructure? If we are only using commercial organisations, which are themselves getting more and more consolidated, and they happen to be, in most cases, the same companies that are the consolidated small number of publishing companies, we are really highly at risk of losing our material and our information. So this is something that I don't think we talk about enough. Certainly in Australia, we don't talk about it enough, that we are so highly at risk by really just throwing everything into a very, very, very small number of baskets. So the case for connecting the opens is, this is some work that was done by Spark a couple of years ago, and the position paper came out beginning of last year. This work was done in Europe, and what they're talking about here is one of the reasons why it's important is because we need to promote a different way of recognising and rewarding researchers, students and institutions. So rather than saying the only way that matters, only thing that matters is publishing in a fancy pants journal, what we're saying is if we start to reward the whole open enterprise, which is the entire research life cycle and the teaching part of the production of teaching materials life cycle, if we recognise that work, then we're starting to be able to really broaden the question about what is it that gets rewarded, and that then starts to change the conversations about what we financially support. Because these sorts of organisations are really reliant, these infrastructures are really reliant on library support. So OAPEN, I am an ambassador, an unpaid ambassador for OAPEN, so I'm putting my hand up on that now. But this is from their most recent annual report. So the OAPEN, the library, relies on library support. 37% of its income is from library support. The directory of open access books, 60% of its funding is from library support. Almost every single library in Australia, I can't speak for New Zealand, I think New Zealand as well though, does import Directory of Open Access books metadata into our catalogues. So we are free writing. We also use this, we're a very high user. So Australia is the 10th highest user of OAPEN Library in the world over the last year. And we are a very, very small population. So our proportional use is very high of that material. Now, the problem is it's quite hard for us to make these cases to our institutions about why we should be supporting this material, this kind of infrastructure. So this is some work I did with some colleagues a couple of years ago, the same piece where we were looking at the usage of monographs versus textbooks, and the outcome of the sort of conclusion of the work that we came to there was it's really hard to track this stuff. We don't have a systematic process for tracking open educational material. Sometimes that's deliberate because we don't want to be spying on people. Nearly done. But it is getting easier for us to be able to start supporting these organisations, because there's now organisations like the Global Sustainability Coalition for Open Science and Invest in Open Infrastructure, Principles of Open Scholarly Infrastructure, to help us navigate that space. And just calling out two good examples, University of Melbourne and QUT, who are not only supporters of this, but actually quite open and loud supporters of open scholarship, and talk about the different things that they support. So a very quick run through all the opens all at once. So I hope that was understandable.
Thank you, Danny. That was fascinating. Thank you very much. It's great to see it all brought together. Do we have questions for Danny? So that there is one here. Danny, what are your ideas on how the language issues, this is actually referring to the presentation before, how they might be resolved? Is it feasible?
It is. It's really tricky. I think that if we talk about the colour problem, which is what was in the previous conversation, and the different colours, the reason why we even talk about the word diamond is open access is because the commercial publishers co-opted the term gold open access. So the calling it green and gold was just not very helpful in the first place. But green open access is sort of secondary open access. It's putting a copy of the work into the repository. Gold traditionally meant it was published open access in the first place. whether you're paid for it or not. Over the years, the idea that gold means pay to publish has sort of taken hold. And so the idea that we needed a different name for if you publish openly at the beginning, but you don't have to pay to read or pay to publish. And so the word diamond came into the equation. Now, gold always worked for publishers because it sounds good. It sounds like the best. It sounds expensive. And so suddenly we've got diamond, which sounds better. And so now they're coming out with words like sponsored open access, because sponsored is a bit it's a bit pejorative. And so they're constantly trying to change the language. So it is quite difficult. I think it's super helpful if we're conscious of these sorts of things that are happening about the way the language is trying to be co-opted, and stay true to what we mean it to be. I don't know quite how to deal with the open science, open research, open scholarship question, because they do mean slightly different things. And if we want to be exact, then you're going to have to choose the one that's the right one for you. Sorry, it's not really an answer.
Thank you. There are a few more. I'll pick one more. Are there discussions happening about a collective model for open infrastructure in Australia that you're aware of?
Yeah. So I'm part of something called the National Open Scholarship or Open Science Task Force, and we've chosen open science because of the UNESCO terminology, which is an organisation that needs some open infrastructure that needs some support, which we need to get organised on. So if you look it up at the moment, we haven't got much online except for a Zenodo Ozatira. I always get them mixed up. Zenodo page. But yes, we're putting in submissions to various INCRIS and other types of governmenty sort of submissions to say we really need a national repository. If they're talking about the future of era 2.0, sort of some sort of research assessment process being data-driven and being pulling information from repositories, then providing a centralised service that can either pull information out of repositories that are working well, or that institutions who have repositories that aren't so great can just use directly. That's what we're arguing for. And we're using statements around sovereignty and those sorts of things. So there's certainly lots of submissions going in. Whether or not they're being read, of course, is a different matter. But yeah, and because that could then provide a home for diamond open access infrastructure. It would be the same. So it could be two sides to the same, a solution for two things.
Okay, and there's another question here for you. Do you think blockchain can be used to track reuse of OERs?
I think that it's quite possible. It took a long time for Counter to come to life. This is a sector-wide problem that I think that we need to be looking at as a sector, particularly if we're going to start systemically or systematically saying we're going to spend 50,000 a year or X% of our collections budget to support some open infrastructure. We're really going to need to have some numbers to be able to say to the institution, this wasn't a charitable donation. We got really good value out of this because this was our interaction with that piece of infrastructure or that publishing, opportunity. So we do kind of need this information, but I don't think us individually trying to solve it is going to wash. I think we do need to, as a sector, address that. But if you've got some ideas, talk to some techie people. Let's see if we can get something moving.
Thank you very much. There is another question, which I'll leave you to answer online, if you don't mind. Thank you so much for your great presentation. And also a big thank you to all our presenters today. They've, been a wonderful range of presentations on everything open today. I hope that you've all enjoyed them and got a lot out of them. And guess what? We have more in store for you tomorrow. We'll be looking at all things AI in relation to our work, and that discussion will be headed with a keynote by Professor Adrian Barnett of QUT. So we'll look forward to that, and I would love to hand over to Donna now for the final karakia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea ngaro ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahia te hua mā kihikihi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori, kia tūturu, ka whakamoa, kia tēnā, tēnā, hui taikie. Thank you, everyone, and see you tomorrow.
Guess what? I'm talking to myself again. Gabby, a huge sense of relief. Got a big smile.
That went so well.
Should we stop the recording now?
Yes.
Yes.
Look, like we've still